Picture one house, and the clock on the wall says 3 in the morning. Upstairs, a girl of 7 is asleep the way only a child can manage it. Mouth open, one leg thrown clear off the mattress. A small engine breathing in and out, and she will not surface, not stir, not know a thing about the world until the sun comes up and hauls her out of it. Now walk down the hall. Same house. Same night. Same darkness pressing on the windows. And here is her grandfather, flat on his back, eyes wide open, looking at a ceiling he has looked at 1,000 nights running. He is not sick. He is not worried about the bills. Nothing in that room is different from the room where the child sleeps, except for one thing. 70 years are lying in the bed with him. So I want to know why. Same walls, same mattress, same black quiet. What did those 70 years do to that man that they have not yet done to the girl? That is the puzzle. And I am going to warn you right at the start, this is not going to be a simple story where I point at one broken part and say, there, that is the villain. Because every time you reach for the obvious answer here, the obvious answer turns out to be only a piece of it, and a smaller piece than you thought. Let me first talk you out of the idea that this is rare, or that it is just a few unlucky old people who drew a bad card. Somebody went and asked. There was a big survey run through the National Institute on Aging, about 9,000 people, all of them 65 and older, and they simply asked these folks how they slept. More than half of them had a standing complaint. Could not fall asleep. Woke up at 4 and could not get back down. Dragged through the afternoon like a wet coat. And it got worse the older you went, and it showed up more often in the women than in the men. Now stop and feel how strange that number is. If I told you that half of all people over 65 had lost the use of one hand, you would call it a plague. But we have all quietly agreed that lying awake at 3 in the morning is just what happens. It is furniture. It is part of the deal, and I do not like accepting furniture without asking who put it there. So we are detectives now, you and we have a body of evidence and no explanation. Where do we start? We start where any good investigation starts, by finding out what actually changed. Not what we assume changed, what we can measure. Here is the first hard clue, and it is a beauty, because it points somewhere nobody expects. There is a chemical the body makes at night. It is called melatonin. Think of it, for now, as a messenger. When the sun goes down, a little gland deep in the brain starts pouring this messenger into the blood, and the message it carries is very simple. It says, "It is night, stand down, prepare for sleep." Now here is the thing worth measuring. In a healthy young adult, when darkness comes, that messenger does not just tick up a little. It floods. The nighttime level runs 8, maybe 10 times higher than what was floating around in the daytime. It is a shout. It is a brass band marching through the bloodstream announcing that the day is over. Now measure the same thing in a man past 70. The band is gone. The flood is a trickle. His nighttime level of that messenger is only about twice his daytime level. Twice, against 8 or 10. Sit with that difference for a second, because it is enormous. The signal that is supposed to separate night from day, the thing that draws a hard black line between awake and asleep, has gone soft. It has gone nearly flat. In the young girl down the hall, night arrives like a door slamming. In her grandfather, night barely closes the door at all. It just leans it a little toward shut. And doesn't that feel like we have found our culprit already? The messenger got quiet. The old man cannot sleep. Case closed. Everybody go home. I felt that pull too. But a good detective is most suspicious exactly when the answer arrives too easily and too early. Because we have not explained anything yet. We have only renamed the mystery. We started by asking why the old man cannot sleep, and now we are asking why his messenger went quiet. We have moved the question. We have not answered it. So let us chase the tempting answer, because you deserve to see it fail with your own eyes. The tempting answer is the one everybody reaches for about the aging body, and it goes like this. The parts wear out. The gland that makes the messenger simply gets old and tired and runs down the way an old pump loses its push. And there is even a real fact to feed this idea, a genuine physical fact which makes it all the more seductive. That little gland in the brain, the one that pours out the nighttime messenger, is called the pineal gland. And as people age, that gland tends to calcify. Little hard mineral deposits build up in it, actual crumbs of calcium, and they crowd its ability to store and release the chemical the way it once did. You can find these deposits. They show up on a scan as a bright little speck. So here is a real, touchable, physical thing going wrong right at the source. The pump is furring up. The factory is silting in. Isn't that satisfying? The messenger went quiet because the machine that makes the messenger is wearing out. And if I were a lazy detective, I would stop right here, and I would be wrong, and I would never know it. Because think about what that explanation quietly assumes. It assumes the whole trouble lives inside that one little gland. It assumes the factory is broken, and that is the end of the story. But a factory does not run on its own private whim. A factory runs on orders. Somebody has to tell it when to make the product and when to shut the line down. That gland does not decide all by itself that night has fallen. It has to be told. It sits there in the dark middle of the brain, blind with no window of its own, waiting for a signal to come down the wire and say, "Now pour it out now, the sun is gone." And if that signal never arrives, or arrives late, or arrives too weak to be heard, then you could have a perfectly good factory sitting idle in the dark, waiting for an order that never comes. So the calcification is real, but I am going to accuse it of being a red herring. Oh, it is guilty of something. I will not let it off entirely. But it is not the mastermind. It cannot be, because it says nothing at all about the order coming down the wire. It only describes a factory that has trouble filling a big order. It does not tell us whether the order was even placed. And the more I look at that flattened signal, that trickle where there ought to be a flood, the more I think the real trouble is not that the factory forgot how to work. I think the factory is not being told that it is night. And that changes everything about where we go looking. Because now I do not want to keep staring at a gland buried in the middle of the head. Now I want to follow the wire backward. I want to find out who sends the order and how they know it is dark outside, and whether something has gone wrong not in the factory but in the messenger surface that is supposed to run down the hall shouting, "The sun is down, the sun is down, start the pour." And that is where this case takes a turn I truly did not expect the first time I followed it. Because when you trace that wire back, all the way back, out of the deep brain and toward the world, you do not end up at a clock. You do not end up at some inner calendar the body keeps. You end up at the eye. You end up staring out a window. The order to make the nighttime messenger, it turns out, is written by light, or rather it is written by the absence of light, by darkness falling, and that message has to get in through the eyes of a 70-year-old man before it can ever reach the gland. So now I have two new suspects standing in the room, and neither of them is the pineal gland. One of them is the window itself, the eye, the thing the light has to pass through to get in. And I am going to show you in a moment that the window of an old eye is not the same window it was at 7 years old. It has changed color. It has, very quietly over decades, started blocking out one particular thing. The other suspect is the messenger surface, the specific little wire that carries the news of darkness from the eye to the clock in the brain. A wire that, until fairly recently, science did not even know was there. A third kind of light catcher in the eye that nobody was looking for, because everybody thought they already knew everything the eye could do. Both of those threads are going to matter. But before we pull on them, I want you to hold on to the shape of what we have found so far, because it is the whole spine of this mystery. The old man cannot sleep. His nighttime signal is a trickle where it ought to be a flood. And the easy answer, the worn-out gland, is real, but it is not enough. Because that gland is only waiting for an order. The order is written in light. And somewhere between the sky outside and the deep dark center of his brain, that order is getting lost. So let us pull on that second thread, the strange little wire nobody knew was there. For a very long time, the story of the eye was a tidy story. There are rods which see in the dark and know nothing of color, and there are cones which drink in the reds and greens and blues of a bright afternoon. Two kinds of catchers, and between them they explain sight. Everybody was satisfied. And when you are satisfied, you stop looking. That is the most dangerous moment in all of science. But then somebody noticed something that should not have happened. Take an animal whose rods and cones are gone, completely gone, an animal that by every reasonable account should be totally blind. Shine a light in its eye. And the clock in its brain still knows. The clock still says, ah, it is day now, and it adjusts. How? The seeing part of the eye is dead, and yet some part of the eye is still whispering to the brain about light. That is a marvelous, uncomfortable little fact, and it means there is a third kind of catcher hiding in there, one that has nothing to do with making pictures. And that is exactly what they found. Scattered across the back of the eye is a small population of cells, and these cells carry their own pigment, a molecule called melanopsin. They are not there to help you read or recognize a face. They are there for one job only. They are light meters. They sit and they count photons, and they send a single, stupid, honest message down the wire. It is bright, it is bright, it is bright. And then, when evening comes, it goes quiet. That wire runs to a tiny knot of cells deep in the brain, sitting just above where the nerves from your two eyes cross, and that knot is the master clock of the whole body. It is the conductor I told you about, and these light meters are the only musicians who ever tell the conductor what time it is. Now here is where it gets beautiful, and here is where our mystery snaps into focus, so pay attention to a number. That pigment, melanopsin, is not equally excited by all colors. It has a favorite. It is tuned most sharply to light at a wavelength of about 480 nanometers. And what color is that? It is blue. A particular deep sky blue. Not red, not orange, not yellow, blue. The light meter that runs your entire clock is, above everything else, a blue detector. And when blue light of that kind pours into the eye at night, the message screams down the wire, it is day, and the brain does the obedient thing. It shuts off the melatonin. It clamps the flood. So now go back and look at our first suspect with new eyes. The aging lens. I told you it turns amber, that it yellows like old varnish. And what does a yellow filter do? Ask any painter, ask anybody who has ever held a piece of orange glass up to a window. A yellow, amber filter eats blue. It absorbs precisely the short blue wavelengths and lets the reds and yellows pass through. The lens of a man of 80 is, without anyone designing it that way, a blue blocking filter installed right in front of the one detector that lives and dies by blue. Do you feel the trap closing? The clock needs blue to know it is day. The blue detector sits at the back of the eye, and the window in front of that detector has been slowly painted over, year after year, with an amber wash that strips the blue away before it ever arrives. The signal is not just weak because the gland is tired. The signal is weak because the message is being censored on the way in. The old man's eye is shouting the news of daylight through a wall of yellow glass, and the clock, straining to hear, catches only a mumble. And this is not a fairy tale I am telling you. Remember Leigh Kessel's 970 volunteers in Denmark, the ones whose lenses she actually measured. The people with the yellowest lenses, the ones blocking the most blue, were the very same people reporting the worst nights, the broken sleep, the too early waking. And she was careful. She checked whether it was just age, just being a smoker, just heart trouble or diabetes hiding in the numbers. It was not. Peel all of that away, and the yellow window still stood there, holding hands with the sleepless night. The color of the glass predicted the quality of the dark. Now, a good detective does not fall in love with his own theory. So let me be honest with you about something that makes this even stranger, and it is a fresh result. You might think, all right, the aging eye simply lets in less of everything, a dimmer version of the same picture. But when people look carefully at how young eyes and old eyes actually process this melatonin-suppressing signal, they found it is not merely turned down like a volume knob. The older visual system handles the light signal differently. The wiring itself, the way the message is built and passed along, has changed. It is not a quieter version of the same song. It is in some subtle way a different arrangement. We do not fully understand that yet, and I am not going to pretend we do. But it tells you the aging clock is not just starved of light. It has, in some sense, learned to listen differently. And there is one more thing drifting underneath all of this, and it is the phase of the clock itself. As we get old, the whole rhythm slides earlier. The moment in the evening when melatonin naturally begins to rise, which is the cleanest marker we have of where the internal clock is pointing, creeps forward. In the oldest people, it arrives something like half an hour earlier than it does in a young adult of 20. That does not sound like much, but think about what it means. The old clock wants to go to bed early, and it wants to wake early, in the black hours before dawn, and it is running on a flattened, feeble signal that cannot hold it steady through the night. The wonder is not that the old man wakes at 3 in the morning. The wonder is that any of us sleep straight through it all. So by now you are probably ready with the obvious cure. If the problem is that not enough light is getting through to the clock, then flood the place with light. More lamps, brighter bulbs. Blaze it up. Give the old eye so much light that even through the amber glass, enough gets through to shout down the wire. Simple. And it is wrong, and I want to show you why it is wrong, because the way it fails teaches you the real answer. Here is the trouble. That blue-loving light meter does not keep office hours. It is on duty at midnight just as much as at noon. So if you blast bright blue-rich light into the evening, into the hours right before bed, you are not helping the clock. You are lying to it. You are screaming daytime into its ear at exactly the moment it is trying, at last, to release its trickle of melatonin. And this is not a delicate effect that needs a searchlight to trigger. Listen to how little it takes. An international panel of the people who study this drew a line. In the last few hours before sleep, they said, the light reaching your eye ought to stay under 10 units on the scale that matters to melanopsin. 10. And an ordinary glowing screen, the kind of thing sitting on a desk or in a lap of an evening, can pour out 60 of those units 6 times over the line all by itself. That is enough to flatten the evening melatonin rise on its own. And it is not just screens. In one careful study, they took healthy people and simply let them use ordinary household lamps in the evening, nothing dramatic, about the brightness you would light a living room to read a book. 65 units of plain lamp light. And that alone shoved the clock later by more than an hour. Their bodies began the night more than 60 minutes behind where they had been the week before, when the evenings were kept dim. Just from the lamps. So the naive cure, more light, turns out to be in the evening a small poison. You would be taking the very tired clock and night after night dragging it in the wrong direction. So the light is not simply good or simply bad. That was our mistake the whole way along. We kept asking how much light, as if it were water and the eye were a bucket and we just needed to fill it. But the clock does not care only how much. It cares above all when. The same light that is medicine in the afternoon is a stimulant at night. It is not the dose alone. It is the timing of the dose. And once you see that, once you really see that the whole game is about when the light arrives and what color it carries, then the answer to our mystery, and the strange advice hidden in the very title of this talk, finally has somewhere solid to stand. Because there is one moment every single day when the sky itself hands you light of exactly the right color, at very nearly the right time, and it has been doing it faithfully since long before there was anyone here to be grateful for it. So let me hand you the pieces one at a time, the way a good detective lays the evidence on the table before he says the name. Some years ago, a group of researchers followed 877 older men with a median age of around 80, and they did not simply ask them how they slept. They strapped little motion recorders on their wrists and measured minute by minute how broken up their nights actually were. And they measured the light these men walked through all day long. Now, if you believe the simple story that light is a stimulant and you want none of it near bedtime and plenty in the morning, you would expect morning light to be the hero. It was not. When they asked which light, at which hour, best separated the men who slept in one smooth piece from the men whose nights were shattered into fragments, the winner was not the morning at all. It was the light that arrived about 6 and 7/10 hours after they woke up. Do that arithmetic on an ordinary life. Up at 6, wide awake by 7, and 6 and 7/10 hours later put you square in the middle of the afternoon sliding toward evening. That was the light that mattered most, and it beat morning and it beat night so badly the odds against it being a fluke were smaller than 1 in 10,000. And here is the part that should make you sit up. The typical man in that study got only about 35 minutes of genuinely bright outdoor strength light in a whole day. 35 minutes. These are people living indoors, behind windows, under lamps that feel bright to the eye and are nothing compared to the open sky. So the trouble was never that they were being blasted with too much light at the wrong time. The trouble was starvation. A clock built to be corrected every day by a flood of outdoor light was being fed table scraps, and it was drifting, the way any clock drifts when nobody winds it. Now put the physics next to the biology, because this is where the whole thing finally clicks shut. Think about what the sky is actually doing to sunlight as the day runs down. At noon, the sun is nearly overhead, and its light drives more or less straight down through the thinnest slice of air it will ever cross. But at sunset, that same light comes in almost sideways, skimming along the curve of the Earth, and it has to bore through something like 30 times more atmosphere to reach your eye. And air is not empty. It is packed with molecules, and those molecules are far better at knocking around short waves than long ones. The blue and the violet, the very short wavelengths, get scattered the hardest of all. The strength of that scattering climbs with 1 over the wavelength raised to the 4th power. Raised to the 4th. That little exponent is doing tremendous work. It means blue light, being not quite twice as short as red, gets scattered something like 10 times more fiercely. So as the light claws its way through all that extra evening air, the blue is stripped out, thrown sideways across the whole dome of the sky, painting it, and what marches straight through to your eye is what is left over. The reds. The oranges. The long, lazy waves that the air could not push aside. And which color exactly was it that the little melanopsin cells screamed at? Which color did they carry straight to the master clock as the order to shut the melatonin down? The blue. Right around 480 billionths of a meter. The precise color the sunset has already taken away. Do you feel the machine turning here? The sky, by pure accident of physics, hands you a light in the late day that is bright enough to feed a starving clock, and yet so poor in blue that it barely whispers the wake-up signal at all. It is a big meal that somehow does not spoil your sleep. Nature engineered no such kindness on purpose. It simply falls out of the geometry of a round world and the arithmetic of scattering, and the eye of a creature that evolved under exactly that sky learned to trust it. So now, at last, the strange advice buried in the title has a floor to stand on. Go and meet the day's light while it is still generous, in the afternoon sliding into that golden hour when the sun sits low and the whole sky turns warm. You are not chasing some mystical sunset ritual. You are doing 2 plain physical things at once. You are feeding a light-starved clock the bright dose it has been missing, at the hour the evidence says counts most, and you are taking that dose in a color that has been gently drained of the very wavelength that would otherwise fight your sleep. Timing and color delivered together for free every clear evening. But I promised you a real protocol, not a poem, so let me be honest about the shape of it, because it is 2 windows to guard, not 1 charm to perform. The first window is the day. Get outside, not for a heroic hour, though when researchers gave older people with real insomnia 45 minutes of strong light a day and held them to it for 2 months, those people fell asleep faster and slept longer, and the gain was still there when they came back to check. Bright light in the day is medicine, and the afternoon is when the dose lands cleanest. That is window 1, and you feel it, you do not fear it. The second window is the last 2 or 3 hours before bed, and here you do the opposite. Here you turn the world down. The expert panels who chewed through all of this landed on numbers you can almost hold in your hand. Through the day, aim high, a couple hundred melanopic units at the eye and more. In those final hours, drop under 10, and where you actually sleep, under 1, near darkness. Now hear how easy it is to break that. An ordinary glowing screen, held close, can pour more than 60 of those units straight into your eyes, 6 times over the evening limit, all by itself. And in one careful study, light no brighter than a normally lit room just 65 units of plain household glow in the evening, shove the body's own melatonin signal back by more than an hour and push bedtime later. So the evening rule is not that light is evil. It is that in that narrow window a little goes a long, long way, and you want it dim and you want it warm, the reds and the ambers, not the sharp white blue of a bright ceiling or a bright screen. And I will leave you the smallest, slyest clue of all, the one that shows how touchy this whole system really is. When scientists tried to measure exactly when an older person's own melatonin began to rise at night, they found that if they left even ordinary room light on during the test, that gentle light suppressed the very hormone they were trying to catch and made the clock look later than it truly was. The measuring lamp changed the thing it measured. If a plain reading light can bend the signal that far in a laboratory, imagine what a bright house does to a real person, night after night, without anyone noticing. So there is your solved case. The old cannot sleep not from one broken part, but from a quiet conspiracy of them. A gland gone stony and shy. A lens turned amber, filtering out the blue the clock lives on. A master timer drifting earlier and reading its light through an aging eye that handles the signal differently, not merely more faintly. And on top of all that, a modern life that starves them of the strong daylight that once wound the whole mechanism tight. No single villain. A committee. But the sky, indifferent and ancient, was already handing us half the remedy long before we understood a word of it, coloring its evening light in exactly the shade that lets a tired old clock take one last honest reading of the day. We only had to be standing outside to catch it. The physics never left. We did. And the light is still there, every evening, patiently waiting to be looked at.